Local resident and brilliant quilter Georgia Payne brings Black history to life before your very eyes through her stunning quilts and storytelling. In addition, Georgia will be a host at the History Tent along with Shalene Richards at the Nubian Jam on July 26th at Forest Park in Everett, Washington. I recently had the pleasure of interviewing Georgia, and we talked about the importance, the critical importance of keeping Black history alive and educating our society. Here's that interview. I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry. So if I'm going to the Nubian Jam, and I will be there, of course, and I've never been to the History Tent, and somebody said, "Hey, you should really go check out the History Tent," what would I see?
Okay. Well, they can expect to see the African American history timeline, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We've kind of have a traveling museum of African artifacts, masks, and artwork. We also have an African American doll collection. Like Barbies, when they do a specific piece of an African American individual, we have some of that. We also have the quilts, as you've mentioned, the Underground Railroad quilt. I have another one that I've added. It's of Black heroes. And I also bring some that I've done with African prints. Uh, Also in our tent, we will have information on the Buffalo Soldiers. They'll be there and they'll be providing information. Also, the Tuskegee Airmen will be providing some information. And this year we're adding one of our assistants, Shalene, is going to add some historical narratives and recordings that people can listen to while they're in the tent. So that's kind of what you can expect to see there.
hmm And it's the kind of thing that all ages can appreciate as well,
Absolutely.
for sure. And I think it's so important. It's important as an adult to educate yourself, but also to educate your kids, because the kids, if they don't if they don't hear these stories, and they don't have to be Black kids, they could be kids of any background. It's so
Right.
important for them to get a true, accurate picture
Right.
of history, because as we both have discussed, a lot of it's been left out. I've learned more about history in the last 5 years than I did in going to school,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
middle school, high school, and elementary school. Um, how difficult, or maybe it's not difficult, to gather all these materials together? Because I always wonder when I go to exhibits like this and I see something that the mask and the posters and all these, is it something that takes a long time to gather all this stuff, or do you do it over time? What's the
I think
process?
over the years, Snohomish County Black Heritage has used people and their interests to help support that tent. I think the African masks were first began to collect by one of their members, and I certainly can't pronounce his name, but that's where the mask came from. He went to travel to Africa and brought some back for them, and I think they just continue to add to the collection. The African American dolls, again, that was someone's personal collection that they were willing to share at the Nubian Jam. And again, Snohomish County Black Heritage has added some of their own. The quilt, a passion of mine, something that I created, and they saw the value in sharing it with the community. So I bring those. And so each year it's just kind of grown. They have some things that actually belong to them, and other things that are shared by collectors and members of the community.
hmm No, that's wonderful. And I just think of the dolls. I think it's how important it is for especially young Black children to see Black dolls. I know that I've seen little kids just throughout my life, little Black kids growing up they didn't have any Black dolls. They had white dolls with blonde
Yeah.
hair. And
And not
just,
and these are not just your everyday dolls. These are dolls. I remember when Barbie first came out as career Barbie, and all the things that went with her and what that did for little girls. So children are able to see these dolls in their different dress and their different professions, and see that African American people have been doing these things for years. And this is just a representation that children can easily relate to.
well, it's so important to self-esteem building, I think, too, and the
Yeah.
interest, self-identity. knowing your history. So talk about the quilts, because I know that I personally had the pleasure of seeing one of your presentations at the local library here, and I've seen also that on YouTube some of these presentations have been recorded. So tell me about that work.
The quilting, I've been sewing most of my life. Quilting has become a passion of mine probably in the last 15 years. The quilt codes of the Underground Railroad was a personal project that I wanted to do. And I completed it, and the quilt has kind of taken on a life of its own. So people are always asking me to present it and talk about it through the library systems, not just here in Washington, but out of state also. And we used it, the presentation for Snohomish County Black Heritage Winterfest program, and that's really kind of what started it, what set it off. So I'm happy to share it and to explain what the codes mean and how that whole idea of using quilts for to help the slaves escape, just what I've been able to learn in my research and after creating the quilt. So it's an interesting story. So I invite people to come to the booth and see it for themselves and ask questions about it.
And so, are you surprised by just how much people don't know sometimes? Because you're doing these presentations, you're doing the tent, and I mean, sometimes I just assume, oh, people know this, simple things, I think. And I'm just amazed sometimes. But are you surprised by that at all?
I am to a degree, because you and I both know that this history, as we've already said, wasn't taught in schools. We had to learn it on our own or hear it in passing. So it's really nice sometimes to have something tangible to share with people. Um, and I think that's where people learn the most. Sometimes it's just from hearing us talk about it. And that's why this tent, I think, is so important because there's a variety of information and ways to share our culture and our history. So,
So, what I guess, it's easy to say that you have a passion for what you do, but what drives you to do this work? Because it's just like, any profession, whether you're a doctor or you're a musician or you're a plumber or
mhm,
whatever. I mean, a lot of times if you really enjoy your work,
mhm.
what satisfaction, I guess, do you get out of what you're doing
I
emotionally?
can't even begin to tell you because I'm so interested in all things quilting and all things African fabrics. My husband and I were privileged to travel to Ghana last year, and so I got to see some of the fabrics up front and close, and learn how they were made, and bring some home with me. And so I just love working with those prints. It's a very creative process for me. Sometimes I know how it's going to turn out, sometimes I don't. And I just love to do it. So they most often they're gifts, but I'm learning I need to keep some things for myself so that I can have something to show. But most often they're gifts, and it's just something that I just love to do. So it's not, I don't even know how else to explain it.
I think you did a great job explaining it, and I think that it shows in the presentations, that I've seen you do. So, anything you'd like to add that I haven't asked?
Um, I want to talk a minute about maybe just the timeline that people will see in the African American History tent. It's quite long. I think I don't remember now exactly, but I think it's over 20 feet long. And it was created that long for visual effect. And it was to help people when answer the question that we often get about slavery, why can't you just get over it? So it was created to demonstrate. It was also created to demonstrate a quote that I found from a historian called Roger Williams, and it was a quote that he made in 1995. And he said, Blacks have a 375-year history on this continent, 245 involving slavery, 100 involving legalized discrimination, and only 30, now 60 years, involving anything else. So the timeline represents, you can see it visually starting from slavery when the Africans were first brought to this continent, and how over time there wasn't much except slavery. That's all there was. Little history was kept or known or shared. And then during the Jim Crow years and all that happened there, and then just since the civil rights movement is when blacks really started to advance and excel in the country. Not that there wasn't history, there was, and not that there wasn't activity, there was, but you can see it visually, the explosion that happened just since the civil rights era. So that's the purpose of the timeline and why it's so long, just to put it in perspective. This is why we don't just get over it.
Well, and I would just add that I don't think we should ever get over it per se. But I think that in today's times, there are people out there, including even some pastors that I've seen, white pastors in churches, that are trying to distort what actually happened. So talking about it and displaying it in an accurate way is critical, because you've got people saying things like, well, slavery was wrong, but there was some good stuff that came out of it, and I mean, the slaves learned carpentry skills, and they made it sound like it was a vocational college or something, where you came out of it and you can go get a job as a plumber now because you learned how to be a plumber when you were a slave. And then you've got plantations around the country where they're having weddings and they become tourist attractions, and they don't mention anything about, or very little about, anything that happened, just around behind the house, behind
Yeah,
the big plantation.
right,
And I'm thinking, would you have a
right,
wedding at a concentration camp in Germany?
right.
I mean, so I think your work is important anyway, but it's even more critical just nowadays because you have so much pushback
Yeah.
and people trying to change history and whitewash it and rewrite it.
I heard something just the other day, and because people they don't want you to know the brutality that was behind slavery,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they don't want their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren to know this is what we did, this is how we did it. Uh, so I think a lot of that is probably what they're trying to suppress. So they want to whitewash it, if you will, that yes, they learned a vocation or they were happy doing what they were doing. But it wasn't the case. So
Well, and they in some cases they found Christianity, and I even so disgusting. This one pastor at some church somewhere was talking about, well, it wasn't right to enslave them, but after all, it got them away from all their voodoo stuff that they were doing, and it's almost like this silver lining somewhere that they were able to find Christianity, and I'm a Christian, but people use Christianity back there as a manipulation tool to keep people oppressed, to make them
yeah.
think this is what's supposed to be going on, I guess.
And that wasn't the reason that we were brought over here for Christian reasons. That wasn't it wasn't for it wasn't mission work.
That was an interview with Georgia Payne, a brilliant quilter and storyteller. She talked about the critical importance of keeping Black history alive and educating the public. I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry.